Hi, and welcome to another episode of Twice as Hard. I'm Janelle Benjamin, founder and CEO of All Things Equitable, and I'm here today with my favorite diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, Danika Bellamy-Sankar. She is a senior manager of diversity and inclusion at ATB Financial, based in Edmonton, Canada. Thank you so much, Danika, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Janelle. So excited to be here. Love your podcast. So happy that you're doing this for all of us. Appreciate your work. So I'm really glad to be a guest today.
Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you agreeing to do this with me and to talk about this phenomenon twice as hard. For those who don't know what it is, why don't you share a little bit about how the twice as hard phenomenon has shown up for you in your life, and where did it originally come from?
Sure. I think this is a really important occurrence that you've brought up. I think sometimes we can feel like, we're in a post-racist or racial haze, and that, race is no longer an issue for Black women because, especially I live in the United States now. And so we had Barack Obama. Maybe there's a feeling that, some of these burdens that have existed for us are no longer there, but that's not true. I think there's a couple of things that I think about when I think about twice as hard. It's the expectations we put on ourselves, but also the expectations that society puts on us in the workplace, just in our everyday activities. What are people expecting Black women to bring? And then how are we perceiving or validating that expectation? And so for me, when I think of twice as hard, I think I've lived in 3 countries. The expectations on Black women have varied depending on the society I've been in. Right now I live in the United States, so that's different as well. But overall, there's been, whether it's through my family, whether it's through the different societies I've been in, there's this expectation that we've got to have the best of everything, so many degrees. We've got to behave in a certain way, and that's just to be treated with the same level of respect as others are afforded. And so
when you say you've been in 3 countries, I know personally you're from the island of Trinidad and Tobago. Speak to me and the viewers about what that expectation looks like in Trinidad, which is a majority Black country. Like, why do you still have this notion, even when, white people are not around, presumably, setting the conditions of our behavior and those expectations? Where does that come from for a Trinidadian woman?
No, and Janelle, I think it is different. So I don't want to conflate all of these nations in the way that we're perceived or the perceptions we have about ourselves. It was different in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are not necessarily majority of African descent. We do have an Indo-Trinidadian population, and there are expectations just within our system that we all work hard and we all perform. It is different because we do have leaders who are Black. We do have in every field you could think of, see ourselves reflected. But there is an overall push for education, a push to excel, a lot of competition between even the Indo and the African race within our country. And so although I felt it, and I don't speak for everyone, but I did feel that I had to perform, that I had to do well. It is different. So when I went to the United States, there is an added element that we have to fight against, sort of a social belief about African Americans and us from the African diaspora that we have to overcompensate for by excelling in an outsized way compared to our peers. So there is a difference. I just want to make sure that I clarify.
We know Trinidad was colonized multiple times.
Yes.
Speak a little bit about the impact of colonization on Black women and those, expectations that we might excel or exceed expectations in certain respects.
No, I think you make a great point, Janelle, and thanks for bringing that up. Colonization continues to have a really serious impact on Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, trying to manage the impact of colonization as a developing state has been an extreme burden for our country. But in terms of the perceptions that we have, we're always trying to, even though they're technically not there anymore, they set the standard. So we're always trying to live up to this, European developed world perception of success, of who we should be. And it's not attainable because we have to forge our own path. Trinidad has tried to do that, becoming one of the first countries to become a republic from the colonial system, being the first country to have Emancipation Day declared as a holiday. Like, we've always pushed against that construct, but we're still part of it. And so even something like colorism, Janelle, I mean, my mother is a white Canadian, but even within my household, I compared myself to my sister's lighter skin, her straighter hair. Within our society, we do have within the African diaspora what we call red, so, and although I would fall into that category, I felt that my hair still wasn't straight enough. I felt that I didn't have the same features as my sister did, and that would hold me back, and that I would have to try a little bit harder to attain the same level of favoritism in a very nepotistic society, which Trinidad had become. And so, there's layers, I think, that come from colonialism that other countries that are not been colonized don't have to deal with. And that's something that Trinidad definitely has to navigate even to this day.
Let's talk about colorism, because I don't believe we've talked about that too much through this series. And I think it's an important subject that you're introducing, the ways in which darker skinned Black women they have to work harder than even fair skinned or quote unquote red, depending on where you are in the world, red woman in Trinidad, right? Speak to me a little bit about maybe some of the advantages that you might have had, right? And just because by virtue of having lighter skin.
And, I was oblivious to it, Janelle, and I was called out. So I'm in high school, for example, I'm chatting with some friends of mine who are darker skinned, and they said, Danika, you don't have anything to worry about. Look how you look. I can't get a job. You can get a job because you're lighter skinned. And that's when I really realized, look, I've never thought of it like that. Like, my dad's darker skinned, but there is a difference at home with the level of attention you get. You when you even come into an interview and they see, well, look how you're looking, you're different. The perception is that you're higher class, or that you should receive more benefits, like an additional privilege because of the way you look. And it's really because of slavery. It's because of, intermixing between slave owners and the ruling class at the time, and slaves. And who would look like me would be the product of that. And they would have enjoyed a higher level of access. Sometimes they wouldn't have to do certain jobs. So the perception was even getting better jobs or better positions within that structure, slave-based structure that was exploiting a group of people within Trinidad and Tobago. And so it's lingered and it's left over. And then another thing too, this is not just, peculiar to Trinidad. When I went to university in Canada, I remember my friend telling me, both of us are Black, she's darker skinned, saying, Danika, people won't shake my hand. They won't hold the door open for me. The overt racism, Janelle, we can be shielded from that just because of the lighter skin. And you have to think, there's really interesting research around what are white people expecting in their space. And just by coming into it as a Black person and having darker skin, their reaction to that sometimes, and their feeling of what they consider to be normal or safe, changes. And then sometimes their reactions are much more overtly negative and traumatic for darker skinned people. So, and that's something that I was again called out on and saying, I never had a problem with that. But I am also Black, but because of the lighter skin, I don't have that experience of having those overtly negative and traumatic experiences.
Take that to the workplace then for me, because you've introduced this idea and it's important to discuss also from the lens of white people who have the power in our society and can grant access and grant opportunities to Black people and want them to, right, for equality's sake. But then they're also impacted by colorism, right, by preferential treatment of people who have more proximity to whiteness. How does that show up in the workplace?
No, I think we're so dedicated to looking at our equity seeking groups, getting them into organizations in a representative way that, you know, Janelle, we don't always take the time to sort of unpack what you're bringing up and some of the nuanced ways that racism can show up and really impact work. You know, and it's sometimes the problem with some of these issues is they don't appear to be extremely overt or clear. There are things like not giving a promotion, just, you know, people not fitting in, you know, feeling like I don't gel with you. I don't, you know, I don't know why, but I just don't feel like you would be a great person for this position. And I hear it all the time. And the idea is how can we standardize things? So we can actually look at someone's performance and say, how are you performing against these objectives that we've given you versus relying on things like feeling? Because we know, because of affinity bias, that if you don't really look like me or you don't talk like me, you don't have the same background as me, I'm less likely to want to give you those privileges within the workplace. So major issue, and I think part of the way that we can protect dark-skinned Black women, people who have accents, people who have differences that show up in a way that is not as the proximity to whiteness isn't as close, is to have more standardized processes and have more perspectives brought into some of these processes as well.
Thank you for saying that, because I think a lot of times we forget the objective measures that are needed to stop the differential treatment and that sort of nuanced relationship between just, you know, human beings, and to regulate human behavior. We need these, right? We need these frameworks or tools to guide, right? To guide our behavior so that our own biases don't really influence us or impact us. So tell me a little bit about how that resonates or in your work now with ATB. How are you introducing frameworks and things for them in your role that would combat some of those things?
Well, honestly, Janelle, we've just started to scratch the surface. So our team has been in place about a year. We've gotten some data. We're looking at the gaps in the data, trying to figure out, yes, we know we have information on, you know, who's coming into the organization, how they're being retained, how they're moving. We know there's differences when we compare across equity seeking groups and dominant groups. We also have some perception data. So people are basically telling us, hey, we don't feel like we're treated the same. So we know these things are happening and we know what's at play. The process of racialization, for instance, is having an impact at work. No, it's just not something that's happening in society, it's trickling in. We're just at the point where we're starting to take a deeper dive into our talent systems, trying to figure out where are the areas where bias is showing up and having a really negative impact. And so it's a process. Like I said, we've just started, but we want to make sure we do it right. And we want to make sure we bring in as many voices as possible. So we're not leaving anybody out. That's super important, because what looks good on paper is not being experienced the same way by everybody within the organization.
Most definitely, most definitely. I've had people who've been watching the series tell me, it's twice as hard for newcomers. It's twice as hard for Muslims. It's twice as hard for this group where, we grew up with the same notions. And so, I don't want anyone to think that this is just unique to Black womanhood, but certainly the notion, that sort of ingrained notion that we need to be better than our counterparts has, showed up for me in my life since childhood, right? It was one of the very first things my mother said to me, and I don't know if it was because, and that I recall, and I don't know if it was because she was a newcomer to Canada or if, the additional burden that she was also a Black woman, but she automatically knew, instinctively knew, you're gonna have to be better than, work twice as hard as, go to university, do all the things just in order to be considered equal. What do you think about that idea that we pass to our children? How does that, I know you've got a son as well. Do you sort of enforce that he needs to be better than, and how does that show up for you and I guess in your personal life?
No, and I think it's really important, Janelle, that you brought this up, the fact that we're passing this on. And I've had some time to think about it, and I've been really enjoying the podcast and all of the, the wonderful women that have shared their perspectives. I think this is a survival thing. I think this is something that unfortunately we have to do because it's true, because we are expected to have so much more than everybody else just to be treated in a similar fashion. And the reason for this is global anti-Black racism. In fact, like I said, I've lived in 3 countries. Even in a country where we are, I would say 40% or more Black, we are dealing with global anti-Black racism. Racism that, basically works to maintain inequity between races, that captures stereotypes and makes them real, affects people's perceptions of us so much to the extent that we internalize it to survive. We want to have the same things other people do. We want to participate fully in society. And so as a result, we've taught ourselves, look, just because of the society you're growing up in, because of the realities and the way things are, you've got to get the degrees, you've got to volunteer, you've got to sit on the boards just for you to gain access to the same jobs that, like, I'm going to say this, mediocre white men get by showing up. And then we layer on gender, right? And we have that intersection of race and gender to deal with. We already know that women have to walk a tightrope, trying to juggle their personality in order to get in the door. We know that women are less likely to have their potential looked at versus what they've done in the past. So I'm Black, I have to deal with global anti-Black racism, a hierarchy of race where unfortunately I'm sitting near the bottom. So I have to deal with those perceptions, and then I have to deal with gender. We are telling our family members this because this is the current atmosphere in most countries that we actually live in, and we want to thrive. So it means we have to overcompensate. So this is a product of society that we continue to have to push against. And unless we do, we'll continue to have to work twice as hard.
And so in order to push against that, what do you think is the solution? Is it for us to sort of unpack the racism that we've internalized and do something different? Or is it on white people to undo the racist systems?
I think there's a number of things that have to happen. We talk about we can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's a lot of things that we need to do to address this. I think, for example, working within an organization, how can I push my company to make the right investments externally, internally as well, to support and repair some of the damage that has been done to the Black community globally. And so that's one of those things. But I think, we don't like to talk about this, but we have not been fully apologized to. We have not seen reparations. We have not seen restitution. When you do not respect a body of people who have been exploited, and that's putting it mildly, and who have now had to live with race-based trauma for generations, and you have not respected them enough to try to repair that, how can we gain the social standing that we need to have to enjoy that same level of respect and not to have to work as hard? So we have people like Mia Motley in Barbados who started to push the reparations talk a little bit, bringing it to the international stage. But that's something that we need to do. We've got to see, money put back into the pockets of the generations of slaves and our kin, and try to work on how do we want to see restitution take place, and how can corporations partner with that process as well. I think that's the heavy lifting. I think we can all continue to gently push against that because, of course, Janelle, we take a risk as Black women when we step out. Research is showing that when we step out and say things in the workplace or even just socially, we get a level of backlash that is incomparable. So we've got to be careful, but we can definitely do our part. But we need to hold the world accountable. We need to hold colonists accountable. We need to enter a process of truth and reconciliation for us as well.
That is really deep, particularly since we're recording this on National Indigenous Peoples Day. Just recognizing their role and contributions, and the fact that, yeah, reconciliation. There was a whole commission established to deal with the recompense that they are owed. And a lot of times we don't talk about, our Black women, the labor, the things that, we've physically done to contribute to build up the wealth of so many Western nations. It's an important conversation when we talk about having to work twice as hard, that we should be, that there should be some restitution as well. So thank you for that contribution. Tell me a little bit now, Danika, about some of the ways that you are currently working twice as hard. I know that you've got a lot on the go with your work with the bank. Tell me a little bit about that and what you're currently doing.
No, for sure. Thanks, Janelle. And I think I just want to just slide in there, whoever's listening, keep your boundaries up. Sometimes when this work, I think we can start ticking on too much, and part of that twice as hard. And I'm always working on how do I put boundaries in place, because there's so much to be done and it can seem like quite a lot. And so I am working on that, but I do work a lot at ATB, making sure that we're doing the things we need to do to advance equity in the workplace. And I just wanted to big up this really important organization, Realize Your Potential. ATB has partnered with them, and they've really seen a need for Black students across the African diaspora in Alberta. And so they've set up a mentoring program, both a peer mentorship and also bringing in some really qualified staff as well. Just to part of it is to boost not only self-esteem, but community, so that the Black community is, leaning on each other, bringing everyone together, supporting one another, because our students, they're not getting that support in schools. And I know, Janelle, you know that as well. They're not always feeling or receiving the love and attention that they need. And so I just want to shout them out. They're having a fundraiser on June 25th. Buy a ticket if you're out in Alberta, if you're out in Calgary, if you're out in Edmonton, and come out and support these wonderful young people and all the important work they're doing to make sure that they have that edge that so many others have in society to ensure they succeed. But yeah, I just want to say, we're working with a lot of partners. I want to also big up BOMYEG and some of the other organizations out in Alberta, just doing wonderful things in the Black community, and just really impressed with so many young women, so many young people really setting up. They're not waiting. They're setting up their nonprofits. They're getting the support they need to make sure that, even BOMYEG talks about, building that generational wealth that was taken from us and we didn't get access to, right? And so really important work that they're doing. But other than that, that's it. That's all I wanted to say, Janelle.
I want to ask you one final question, because when you said, big up this place and big up that place, you made me think about the ways in which we as Black women need to just show up authentically, right? To just speak how we speak and be who we are at all times. How does an inclusive leader create an environment of belonging for Black women?
Oh, really great question. And I think you need to touch base. Don't assume that that you're making a culture of inclusion. Ask, make sure you're bringing them into the conversation. We've been doing inclusive leadership training at ATB, and we talk a lot about this. And do your research, find out about race-based trauma. Understand some of the daily things we go through. Janelle, because sometimes I show up at work and I've had to deal with 2 or 3 retailers who've given me microaggressions, who thought, made me feel like I'm stealing, treated the white man or the white person in front of me better. And as soon as they see me, they barely want to say hello. Like, I'm carrying the burden of your racism, and the impact of societal racism before I even hit the door. And then I'm in a meeting and maybe I'm experiencing microaggressions as well. You won't make eye contact with me. You don't follow up with a question. Ask, bring someone along to a meeting. Let them observe you. Maybe they could catch microaggressions. And if they tell you, make a safe space so people can tell you. Assume that you're going to get it wrong sometimes. And if they tell you, watch how you respond. Don't brush it off and say, no, I'm not racist. Hey, bias affects us all. take an implicit association test, know what they are, and then do some reflective work, slow down, watch how you're making decisions, you know. And like I said, if somebody brings it to you, apologize, ask them what, if they can and they have the energy and ability to share with you, take what they tell you as truth and make some changes. But I can tell you for sure, we're not making this up. This is happening to us all of the time, right?
Absolutely.
And you don't want to be part of the problem, right? You want to be part of the solution. You want to be a good, inclusive leader. So you've got to make some changes for sure.
And how do they create those safe spaces for us? And is it better to create a safe space or a brave space? I've had this debated.
Well, at work, we talk about safer spaces, right? So we know that not everyone is going to experience the spaces the same way. But, you know, I want to be honest with you, within our capitalist systems and our top-down hierarchies, a lot of things that we hope would be good advice and things that we ask our leaders to do to be inclusive can be corrupted. So for example, we try to tell our leaders, you know, look at it as a learning journey. You know, don't be so hard on yourself if you make a mistake. And then we've had them push back when they've done something wrong and say, hey, I'm learning, so it's okay if I get it wrong, right? Now you're making me feel like I'm the problem because I've created discomfort for you, right? So we're always reassessing the kind of advice we're giving or how we're encouraging them to create a safer space. And it's iterative, so it's always changing. So I'm careful with the language as well. I'm careful using brave space. I'm careful using safer space. I'm careful using learning journey, Janelle, because you know how these things can evolve. And so I think the most important thing you can do is think about, how do you receive feedback? Are you getting defensive? Are you shooting the messenger? If that's your overall way that you receive feedback, no one's going to come to you. And then you'll never know. And then the problems that you're perpetuating will continue. And then you're going to see people just leaving your team. They're going to quit, right? I think it's important. Unfortunately, some of this work requires self-reflection. And so we can't always control our leaders and push them to self-reflect. But what we can do is put structures in place where if you are continuing to do this, you are reported, you are held accountable, and then you are terminated if you won't change.
Yeah, you're not on a learning journey forever, right? There is still some minimum threshold of competence that is expected of you as a leader. And I'm glad that you raised it as well. Danika, how can people reach out to you? Because I'm sure they're going to want to. You've just displayed why I absolutely love you. How can people get a hold of you in the future?
I'm on LinkedIn, Janelle. You know, we have a big DEI LinkedIn family, lots of great people to follow. But if you want to follow me, I accept all follow requests, all connect requests, please do. And I do have a charity, it's ethically.ca if you want to check it out. Basically meant to sort of boost the economic circumstances for women in Calgary and the Alberta area. So check that out as well. Spell
that for everybody so that they know exactly how to get to your website. Yes, I'm making you spell.
ethicali.ca.
I think there's an I in there. ETHICALLY or something. Ethically I.
Yes. Ethically.ca. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Danika, for being a guest. Thank you all for watching another episode of Twice as Hard. We'll see you next time for another great episode, and I appreciate you watching.